In a troubling account from Mississippi, a 13-year-old girl became pregnant after being assaulted by a stranger. She sought an abortion but faced immense hurdles. With the nearest provider 9 hours away, cost, travel, and work issues rendered it unfeasible. This highlights the aftermath of the U.S. Supreme Court overturning abortion rights, with 14 state laws banning abortion now in effect. These restrictions disproportionately impact vulnerable communities, worsening existing health disparities. This case underscores the urgency of discussing women's rights, healthcare access, and the broader consequences of such policies. This article is from The Guardian entitled 13-Year-Old Gives Birth After She Was Raped and Denied an Abortion in Mississippi, written by Lauren Atani, and it was published on August 14th of 2023. I'm curious to know the thoughts of my panel, and Infidel, if you don't mind, I will come to you first.
Well, you know, three people, they involuntarily became part of a parental control experiment by the state of Mississippi. A round of applause for Mississippi. They get to decide when you become a parent. Rape, it doesn't matter. For self-declared pro-lifers, the story ended at the birth. Declare victory and go home. Another family now in the system to complain about, because railing against Medicaid, SNAP, TANF, and WIC, those are popular in these circles already. These are things that actually improve people's lives, but and funding needs to be increased. But they don't want to worry about that. They just want to have their pro-life stance. But now we have an already struggling now grandmother whose life is 10 times more difficult, and a new mother with a whole new set of challenges in front of her. A child to raise while she still is a child, and the ongoing trauma of what she's experienced is not something that just happened and now the baby's born and moves past it. But the truth is, she'll probably do this with inadequate therapy because she probably doesn't have coverage of any insurance that's going to be able to give her the treatment she needs anyway. And of course, now we're facing with an infant whose scenario is pretty much set up with failure. Like his mother, he's at increased risk for drug abuse, incarceration, and mortality. There are people who will dismiss this and say, well, a tough hand, but there's people that beat the odds and they can just, they can do this and do that. Sometimes I don't think they understand what odds mean. No, pull yourself up by your bootstraps nonsense sounds great to them, but reality is very different. We're just sitting in a situation with a mother who's now a grandmother, a child who's still a child, and a child is facing a situation where the system's not designed to help the powerless; it's only the powerful. So where this goes for her and her family, I mean, it's an unfortunate situation. Worse than that, I mean, what we have now is an unfortunate situation, but all completely avoidable. And I just can't understand what people are thinking. And wanted to say, Phil, what are your thoughts on this situation?
Well, when I read this article, it had my mind racing because, again, a number of questions arose when that had me really questioning, like, number one, the young lady, the child was raped in her backyard, in the parents' backyard. So where were the parents? Where was the adult? Right? Then on top of that, 10 to 11 weeks she was into the pregnancy and the parents found out then, just because the child was going through some suffering, withdrawal before that, a change in mood, and the parents didn't even take her to the doctor or to seek some sort of psychological help that something might be going on. But when you read further in the article and realize, okay, wait, it seems as if these are black people, right? And where they are located is in a very poor area of the state. So it is like, okay, if they have to pay as it was in Fidel, so they don't have the, probably they don't have the medical insurance, right? And sometimes poverty can do certain things to persons where it is so hard for them that sometimes these things are overlooked by them because of the state they are in. Um, right? And I was like, but I was still kind of puzzled because oh, it took so long. Then they decided to take the child to the emergency. So that is something that could have been done earlier if the child was suffering or you notice certain things happening. That should have been done way earlier because if you could eventually take them to the emergency room, right? They could have been done earlier. And in one case, in some cases, I'm wondering if it is that the parents were neglectful, and then on the other hand, it is like okay, poverty-stricken area kind of have me between the two, wondering which it is or if it's both. You know, so it is really, really kind of confusing as to really what is going on, and especially a child in the backyard. You mean no parent was around to hear what was going on? I don't know. Glenn, sorry, infidel. What are your thoughts on this? Because this has me really baffled.
Well, I have to say that I think as a parent of a 13-year-old and knowing how that plays out for her, there are situations where I don't know what's going on, and unfortunately, I also know that people in positions of dominance are going to do their thing, and that's going to be dominate. And a child is going to be, as we talked about at a point, going to be naturally obedient uh, to that. But rather than get too deep into that, John, I was kind of wondering what your take was.
Well, 13-year-old child was raped in her backyard, gave birth to a male child, and now for the rest of her life, unless she gives it up for adoption, she's going to have to be reminded of that rape every moment of every day. I want that to sink into everybody. She was violated and then violated again. This is going to be a long, just like, there's stories like this all the time. Children giving birth to children. This is personal to me as well because when I was a dispatcher, I had a case similar to this, and it's tragic on so many levels. But where do people get off? You know, blaming the victim on this. A nurse asked the girl, "What have you been doing?" after they found out she was pregnant. Automatically blaming the victim. She's 13 years old. Give it a rest. Try and give her some support. Imagine the horror of that poor girl. You know, want, they're wanting a drink of empathy. Anyone? Uh, damn. The whole idea that a state can impose this on a child and then claim they're protecting children in so many other ways by accusing minority or marginalized people of doing the very same thing as happened to this girl. I'm just beyond words of how really, if people can't see that lie right up front, they're being willfully blind. And that's a legal terminology, maybe, but yeah, they're being willfully blind to a crime that is happening. You know, I feel sorry for the child that was born. Uh, think about how he's going to grow up. And in the situation he's growing up was hard enough as it was. But to grow up in a family that sees him as a reminder of a violent act, to me, that's just beyond any kind of idea of justice. And the people in Mississippi who don't see this ought to have it broadcast, except for the poor girl would get too much popularity, too much publicity, and I don't think she needs that right now. But they should have this case and the case of that 10-year-old in, I think it was Kentucky,
Ohio.
Ohio, who had to
Yes.
travel to Illinois to get
Indiana.
Indiana to get an abortion.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is happening because people have their little easy answer to everything. Everything's black and white, and there's nothing that's black and white. The black and white fallacy. Well, it's murdering a child. Well, yeah, either that or it's murdering the mother. The mother can have more kids. I mean, evolutionarily, this makes no sense at all. But, it's just really doesn't make sense that you would cause a child to have to go through this. She has physical damage, I'm sure, from giving birth that she's going to have for the rest of her life. Those reproductive costs, we used to say in biology, are immense when the child is when it's the person who's giving birth is too young. There's just immense damage to their bones, to their organ structures, to all their internal organs, who get pushed around in a small body and crammed into a very small space. That damage later on will cause complications. Maybe not right away, but as she grows, it's going to cause complications, I would bet. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a lawyer, but I know that this is going to be a living nightmare for her for most of her life. All for a silly little propaganda point so that a political party can maintain itself in power. I'm beyond words from anything further than what I've just said. These people, I just can't go there. So, Cynthia?
Yeah. I first want to just remind our audience that if you have some time and want to hear some experts' opinions about this particular subject, specifically about the Dobbs case that we're talking about, and also abortion and how it affects um, uh, people who have also been assaulted. We did a show, I believe it was with a panel full of doctors and me. um, that was actually talking about this particular subject and the repercussions that can come from it. And I knew when the Dobbs decision came out that stories like this would be in abundance. As you mentioned, Jonathan, we actually covered the 10-year-old girl who was raped by her mother's boyfriend, and who was able to get to Indiana, but it was only a state over. The nearest place, when we specifically talked about the 9-hour drive, was from where the young lady is at in Mississippi all the way to my city, Chicago. That is the nearest place where one could get an abortion. And we are no longer in the great migration time any longer. So, people being able just to come up here in abundance, especially without the funds, can't do it. And we know that this was specifically the issue with the mother of the 13-year-old. I believe that they called her in the article. They gave her a pseudonym. I know that they called the young girl Ashley. Does anybody remember the pseudonym that they gave them? The now grandmother,
Regina.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so she didn't have the money to come to Chicago to travel over 9 hours with a pregnant young child to have an abortion and then pay for an abortion. And I'm pretty and now there are resources available. There are different funds that are out now, but if you don't have the wherewithal to know how to get those resources, you're kind of stuck. And I'm pretty sure that this was an issue specifically with this mother who finds out about her daughter being sexually assaulted and seeing about trying to get her an abortion. And I also read that Mississippi specifically has only granted about 2 abortions since the Dobbs case came out when it came to rape, even though it says in their trigger law that rape rape and incest is an exception for people to be able to get an abortion. But when you had like the Jackson clinic closed because of the Dobbs decision, and I believe there was another clinic that closed,
Mhm.
where are these people going to go? Even if you say, okay, we grant it because this person was victimized, it was without consent, and she's a child. So this is incest and also rape, point blank, period. Where is she to go? Because the providers are no longer in that state in order to provide a healthcare service that was desperately needed. And also, another thing I wanted to mention as an anecdote, I got into a social media debate with a former friend of mine, emphasis on former, who told me this right wing talking point that is full of junk, that only 1% of rapes end up in pregnancy. I'm here to tell you, people on the panel, that that is a fucking lie. These are the facts. And this is according to the Washington Post. And I don't care how you all feel that Jeff Bezos actually owns the Washington Post, he didn't write the article. Now, because of violence and stigma associated with rape, as well as different definitions, there are a wide range of statistics concerning rape. The CDC, for instance, estimates that nearly 1.3 million American women were victims of rape or attempted rape in 2010. About half were actual rapes. But the RAINN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, said about 64,000 women were raped between 2005 to 2004 to 2005, rather, citing a Justice Department data. Now, the number of rapes will make a huge difference in the number of rapes that result in pregnancy. Now, the most widely cited study of this question embedded was, and we're going to have the study below in the show notes, was actually published in 1996 by the American Journal of Obstetricians and Gynecology. And when determined, a national rape related pregnancy rate of 5% or more per rape among victims were between the ages of 12 to 45, in between the ages of this young girl. And the study was based on a survey of 4,008 adult women and an over 3 year period, which covered a range of questions on drug and alcohol abuse, but also included questions intended to draw out more information on sexual assaults. But regardless, if the 1% stat were true, which it isn't, pregnancy can and does happen to rape victims. In this case, it happened to a child. And even the article states in Mississippi technically made exceptions for when pregnancy is from rape or is life threatening. But abortions granted under these exceptions are extremely rare and poorly tracked. And in January, the New York Times reported that Mississippi made 2 exceptions, like I mentioned before, since the state abortion ban went into effect. And the state requires that a rape be reported to law enforcement in order for it to actually qualify for legal abortion. But we already, and I could go into statistics, but we don't have time for that, of how many times that people are actually sexually assaulted versus reporting to law enforcement. because of stigma, because of nurses telling a 13-year-old young girl, "What have you been doing?" Why don't you ask the person who assaulted her what he was doing? I get so sick and tired, I'm sorry, guys. You're just gonna have to deal with my soapbox right now. I get so sick and tired of women being blamed for the violence that happens as a result of sexual assault. And I'm not saying that cisgender men can't be assaulted. Yes, they can. And children can be assaulted. Everybody can be assaulted. But data already shows that cisgender women or people who identify as women are more on the actual spectrum of being sexually assaulted than any other group of people. And one of the highest groups racially of women to be sexually assaulted are Black women. And I'm not even going to mention, which I'm about to mention now, that Black women are 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy related complications compared to white women, according to the state's health department, according to Mississippi. And according to the Guttmacher Institute, 60% of women who seek abortions are women of color, and about half live below the federal poverty line. So, this is all the things that are coming against this young child who's about to raise a child, who doesn't have the money to actually raise a child, who now the grandmother is now raising her child plus another child, and who didn't even have enough money to take her child to Chicago so that the child will no longer have a child. It's gross. And I'm so sick and tired of hearing this over and over again, especially people who are being victimized when it comes to not only a person who just randomly decides to actually throw violence upon them, but upon the state that they're actually living in. I'm done with my rant. And I just give me a moment. But I'm giving you a moment, dear viewer, that if you want to hear more from the nonprofits, click here.